The room went silent. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating, as Jin-ho Kim stared down at the piece of paper in his hand. His gaze flickered from the document to the woman who had handed it to him. Naomi Ellis, the janitor, the one no one ever really noticed. But today was different. Today, she was standing before him, hands trembling, holding a stack of papers that had just spilled from a table. Naomi knew the weight of the moment. She could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on her, waiting for her to serve. To obey. But when she extended the papers to him, offering her hand to pass them over, Jin-ho recoiled. His face twisted in disgust. "I can't touch that," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. The words sliced through the air like a knife. "Someone else take it. I don't touch things from people like her." The room fell into an eerie silence. Every eye in the room was now on Naomi. Phones clicked, recording the moment. A room full of high-powered executives, lawyers, and investors, all bearing witness to a moment that would change everything. Her heart sank, but something inside her snapped. She was done being invisible. It wasn't just a spilled drink. It was an insult, a line she was no longer willing to let slide. The world had just witnessed it, and now she had a choice: stay quiet and fade into the background, or expose the very empire that thought it could crush her. Naomi Ellis wasn't just the janitor anymore. She was about to become the one person Jin-ho Kim could never control. Have you ever been publicly humiliated in front of people who thought they were better than you? What would you do in Naomi's shoes? Subscribe to Tales by Wave and drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk about it. Naomi's hand shook as she walked away from the conference room, her head still reeling from what had just happened. Jin-ho's words echoed in her ears. "I don't touch things from people like her." Her heart felt heavy, but there was no time to process the sting. The eyes of everyone in that room were still on her, watching her retreat. She had been humiliated. The world had just seen her for what they thought she was: invisible. Her feet moved on autopilot as she stepped into the hallway, her breathing shallow. A janitor. That's all they saw her as. She was the one who cleaned up after their messes, but none of them cared enough to see her as anything more. Naomi paused by the elevator, her fingers gripping the metal frame. The voices from the conference room, the laughter, the murmurs of approval from those who had witnessed her disgrace, it all blended together in her mind. They were all complicit. They had all let this happen. And Jin-ho? His arrogance had crossed the line. He thought he could stand at the top, throwing around his power like it was a game, treating her like she was nothing more than an obstacle in his pristine world. He had no idea how much she had seen, how much she knew. But today, something had shifted inside Naomi. She wasn't going to be ignored anymore. Her humiliation had awakened something in her, a quiet storm that had been building for months. She could feel the rage simmering beneath her calm exterior, but this time, it wasn't going to be tucked away. As she continued down the hallway, the fluorescent lights above flickered, casting strange shadows on the walls. Naomi's mind raced. She was done hiding, done playing small. Jin-ho had made a fatal mistake. He had underestimated her, treated her like a disposable cog in his empire. The door to the service elevator opened, and she stepped inside. The moment the doors shut behind her, she exhaled sharply, feeling the weight of the moment press down on her chest. She had lived for too long in the shadows, invisible to everyone but herself. Naomi wasn't going to let him get away with it. Not anymore. The next morning felt different. Naomi stood in front of her bathroom mirror, staring at the woman who looked back at her. The same soft eyes, the same tired expression, but today, she wasn't the same. The humiliation from the day before had burned deep into her, but it had also ignited something she hadn't felt in years. Power. Naomi's hands were steady now. The anger that had simmered for so long was no longer a whisper. It was a roaring flame. She didn't just want to get back at Jin-ho. She wanted to destroy everything he had built. He thought he was untouchable, but he had no idea who he was really messing with. She turned away from the mirror and walked into the living room. The papers she'd been collecting for months were still stacked on the coffee table, each document a piece of the puzzle that would bring down Cum Enterprises. Naomi had been careful, methodical in her work. Every file, every call, every piece of information had been logged, documented, and cross-referenced. The company was rotten to its core. Money laundering, fraud, bribery, Everything was here in these pages. Everything she needed to bring Jin-ho to his knees. But she didn't have to do it alone. Naomi had already reached out to a trusted lawyer, someone who had been looking for a way to expose Cum Enterprises' illegal operations for years. The plan was set. The evidence was ready. All that was left was to take the next step. Still, as she picked up the files, a part of her hesitated. Would she be able to do it? Would the world listen to her, or would they dismiss her like everyone else? She wasn't some powerful CEO or high-ranking executive. She was just a janitor. The thought made her pause for a moment, but only a moment. She wasn't going to let that stop her. Naomi had been dismissed, overlooked, and underestimated her whole life. It was time to show them all what she was capable of. She clicked the phone open and dialed the number of the lawyer. The phone rang once, then twice. Hello? Naomi took a breath. It's Naomi Ellis. I'm ready. Naomi stood at the edge of the city skyline, watching as the sun dipped low, casting a golden hue over the glass towers of downtown Chicago. It felt like everything in her life had led to this moment. The quiet janitor who had been ignored, dismissed, humiliated, now held the power to bring down a mafia empire. But that power wasn't free. Every decision she made now carried weight. The moment she handed over the evidence to the authorities, her life would change, forever. And Naomi wasn't sure if she was ready for what came next. She glanced over at the papers spread out on her kitchen table, files, emails, documents that detailed everything from fraudulent transactions to secret accounts filled with dirty money. She knew Jin-ho's empire wasn't just about money or power. It was about control. His control over everyone. Over her. Every file she'd gathered was a nail in his coffin. But the stakes were higher now. The risk was higher. Naomi couldn't just hand over the evidence and walk away. She had to make sure it stuck. She had to make sure that no one could deny what was going on behind those shiny office walls. The phone call she'd made to the lawyer yesterday had set everything in motion. Now, she had to wait. Wait for the authorities to act. Wait for Jin-ho to slip up. But waiting wasn't easy. The longer she waited, the more the fear gnawed at her. The more she wondered if she was making a mistake. What if the world wasn't ready for the truth? What if she was wrong, and her efforts would be buried just like she had been for years? Her mind wandered to Jin-ho, his arrogant face, his sneering words. The way he'd treated her, the way he treated everyone beneath him. That was the thing about people like him, they thought they were untouchable. But Naomi had been watching, and she had seen everything. The doorbell rang. Her heart skipped. Naomi took a steadying breath and walked over to the door. This was it. No more hesitation. The phone call came earlier than Naomi expected. She had been pacing around her apartment, back and forth, for what felt like hours. The waiting was the hardest part. It gnawed at her, made her feel like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to fall. Every minute felt like a year, and every ring of her phone sent a jolt of adrenaline through her body. When the phone finally buzzed, she was almost relieved. It wasn't the authorities yet, but it was a call she had been waiting for. The lawyer. She grabbed the phone, her hand trembling slightly as she answered. Naomi Ellis, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. The voice on the other end was calm but with an edge of urgency. Naomi, we need to move quickly. They're onto you. Her heart dropped. What do you mean, onto me? They've noticed something's off with the merger. The financial discrepancies. Jin-ho's people are already circling. I've had a few whispers. The lawyer paused, a subtle tension in their voice. They're investigating, Naomi. This isn't just about a few bad deals anymore. It's bigger than we thought. Naomi's mind raced. Bigger. She had suspected it, but hearing the confirmation still hit her like a punch in the gut. Everything she had been collecting, the documents, the recordings, it was all about to come crashing down. Jin-ho's already trying to cover his tracks, the lawyer continued. We don't have much time. But you're not alone in this. We'll make sure the truth comes out. Naomi exhaled slowly, trying to steady her breath. Her world was about to shift, and not in the way she'd imagined. She had prepared herself for the consequences, but she hadn't expected the fight to come at her so quickly. The cracks in Jin-ho's empire were starting to show, but they were also shifting everything around her. She glanced at the stack of evidence sitting on her table, the key to taking him down. It was now or never. Naomi knew she had to act fast. She wasn't just playing with fire anymore, she was about to set the whole thing ablaze. She hung up the phone and stood still for a moment, the weight of the decision settling in her chest. This was it, the beginning of the end. The next morning, everything changed. Naomi had barely slept, her mind buzzing with the weight of the conversation from last night. She had done everything she could to prepare herself. The evidence was ready. The lawyer had promised to make things happen. But nothing could prepare her for what came next. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a news alert. Naomi hesitated for only a second before swiping the screen. Cum Enterprises CEO under investigation for financial fraud, the headline blared. Naomi's breath caught in her throat. She scrolled, her heart pounding. The article mentioned everything: the money laundering, the shell companies, and the strange patterns in the company's financial statements. Jin Ho's empire was starting to unravel. But that wasn't what made Naomi's stomach turn. It was the image attached to the story, the one that made her blood run cold. A video clip, recorded just hours before the story broke, showed Jin Ho Kim standing in front of his office, visibly agitated, a group of executives and lawyers behind him. The camera angle was too perfect to be anything but intentional. And in the corner of the screen, there it was. A tiny detail, but a massive clue. Naomi's eyes widened as she recognized the man in the background, one of Jin Ho's most trusted advisors, talking directly to a reporter about company irregularities. That was no accident. The investigation wasn't just about finances. Jin Ho's own people were turning on him, leaking what they knew to the press. It hit Naomi like a freight train. She wasn't the only one who had been watching. Her heart raced as the truth settled in. Jin Ho's downfall had already begun. The seeds of doubt were planted, and his reputation was now in jeopardy. The video was out there, and his image was already damaged. He had no idea that his empire was about to fall apart. Naomi sat back in her chair, eyes glued to the screen. The moment she had waited for was here. Naomi couldn't believe how quickly everything was spiraling. The day after the news broke, Cum Enterprises was in chaos. Calls were coming in from every direction, investors pulling out, lawyers scrambling to protect what was left of Jin Ho's empire, and media outlets circling like vultures. Naomi stayed hidden in her small apartment, glued to her phone, watching as the world she had known for so long began to fall apart. It was surreal, like something out of a movie. Jin Ho, once so confident, so untouchable, now stood in front of cameras, his face twisted with frustration, shouting at reporters, trying to maintain some semblance of control. But Naomi knew better. The cracks were too big now. No matter how much he yelled, no matter how many times he tried to explain, the truth was already out. His empire was crumbling, and Naomi was the one who had lit the match. But now, she felt a strange satisfaction mixed with a gnawing sense of unease. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the turning point when everything shifted. But now that it was happening, Naomi couldn't ignore the fear creeping in. Was she ready for this? As much as she wanted to believe she was in control, she knew the fight was far from over. Jin Ho was a dangerous man, and even in his weakened state, he still had the power to turn everything back around. The people who had once supported him were now backing away, but there were others, silent players in the background who had been waiting for the right moment to strike. Naomi had exposed him, but she hadn't taken down everything that held his empire together. There were still people who believed in him, still people who would stop at nothing to protect him. And Naomi? She was still just a janitor in their eyes, a ghost in the system, someone who had been brushed aside for too long. She wasn't safe yet. Her phone buzzed, breaking her thoughts. A message from the lawyer. They know you're involved. Be careful. It's not over yet. Her stomach dropped. The stakes were higher now. She had started this, but now she had to see it through. There was no going back. The next few days felt like a whirlwind. The fallout from the scandal was everywhere. Jin Ho's face was plastered across every news outlet, his every move scrutinized by the media, the public, and even his own people. Naomi couldn't escape the flood of articles and videos. She was barely able to sleep, knowing she had pushed Cum Enterprises into chaos. But now, the situation was getting bigger than she had ever imagined. The public humiliation started when a video surfaced, and this time, it wasn't just about the financial fraud or the shady dealings. This time, it was about Jin-ho himself, caught in a moment that no amount of spin could fix. The clip was brief, but it spoke volumes. It showed Jin-ho in his office, arguing with a group of lawyers and investors. His temper flared, his face red with rage. But what really grabbed everyone's attention was the moment when, in the middle of his rant, he turned and refused to shake hands with a black employee, a woman who had been working in the company for years. He didn't even look at her as she stood there with outstretched hands. Naomi had seen the video. She knew exactly what it meant. This wasn't just about a power struggle, it was about race and injustice, and it was being broadcast to the entire world. The video went viral. Jin-ho's actions were now undeniable. He had been exposed. Naomi felt a strange satisfaction as she watched the video. This was the man who had treated her like a ghost, dismissed her because of her skin color, and then humiliated her in front of everyone. Now, the world could see him for what he truly was, arrogant, entitled, and racist. But even as the video spread like wildfire, Naomi couldn't shake the unease creeping in. She had been planning for this moment, but now that it was here, there was no turning back. She had pushed Jin-ho's empire to the brink, but what if he still had the power to retaliate? What if there were still people loyal to him, ready to protect him no matter what? As the press conferences continued and the investors continued to pull out, Naomi sat in silence, her phone buzzing with messages. Jin-ho was being dragged through the mud, but it wasn't just his company that was at risk. It was his entire reputation, and Naomi had become the one to expose it all. But as the phone buzzed again, Naomi felt her heart race. The next chapter was coming, and she was standing at the edge, uncertain of how it would play out. The walls of Cum Enterprises were closing in. It had been a week since the video of Jin-ho's racist outburst went viral, and the fallout had been swift and unforgiving. His once impenetrable empire was now a crumbling facade, each day another piece of his world slipping through his fingers. Naomi watched it unfold in real time, her phone buzzing non-stop with news updates, investor withdrawals, and leaked emails. The beast was dying. She stood in front of the TV one night, watching a news anchor summarize the latest headlines. Jin-ho Cum, CEO of Cum Enterprises, under investigation for financial fraud and corruption. The company's future hangs in the balance as the fallout from this scandal deepens. It was all happening. Everything Naomi had quietly prepared for was now in motion. The authorities had launched an official investigation, and Jin-ho's lawyers had been forced to issue a statement denying everything. But no one believed him. The public backlash was too much. Jin-ho's own people were turning on him, investors, employees, even close allies. Everyone was jumping ship. Naomi felt a strange satisfaction, but also a growing anxiety. What if it wasn't enough? What if, despite all the evidence, despite everything she'd done, Jin-ho still had a way out? A knock on her door broke her thoughts. She turned, expecting it to be the delivery she'd ordered. Instead, it was a familiar face. A woman in her mid-40s, smartly dressed in a tailored suit. Someone Naomi knew from the corporate world but had never actually met. Naomi Ellis? The woman asked with a steely gaze. Naomi nodded cautiously. I'm here on behalf of some investors. We need to talk. Her heart skipped. Another player in the game. Naomi had been expecting it, but now, as the stakes rose higher, the tension was undeniable. What did these people want? What was the price of victory? Naomi stepped aside, letting the woman in. She knew the next words she heard could change everything. The world was watching, and Jin-ho's empire was no longer just about power, it was about survival. Naomi had already won one battle, but the war? That wasn't over yet. The world had shifted beneath Naomi's feet. It had been 2 weeks since that knock on her door. 2 weeks since the investors' meeting where Naomi had sat across from people who held more power than she could have ever imagined. They had laid out their plans, their offers, and their cold calculations. Naomi had been prepared for everything, the power plays, the manipulation, but what she didn't expect was the quiet confidence she felt as she sat there. She'd fought for this moment. She had exposed a man who thought he could crush anyone beneath his heel. And now, as she sat in the conference room of the lawyer's office, the stakes were about to be sealed. The empire that had been built on lies was crumbling, and she was the one standing at the center of it all. Jin-ho Cum was out. His name was being removed from every official document, every deal that he had signed. Naomi's heart raced, but it wasn't fear that made it beat faster anymore. It was something different, something she hadn't felt in a long time. It was empowerment. The lawyers in the room discussed numbers and settlements, but Naomi's mind wasn't on the legal jargon. It was on the simple truth of it all: she had won. The empire that had humiliated her was no more. The same company that had ignored her, disrespected her, and treated her like nothing, now had to face the consequences of their actions. They were all scrambling, but Naomi had already seen the writing on the wall. The last final blow came when the media released an official statement: Kum Enterprises to be dismantled, Jin-Ho Kum stripped of power following widespread criminal investigation. The investors had pulled out, the executives had disbanded, and the legal system was closing in on Jin-Ho faster than he could react. And then, in the midst of the chaos, Naomi Ellis, the quiet janitor, the one who had been invisible for so long, was handed a seat at the table. No longer a silent observer, she was now in control. The day ended with Naomi walking out of the office, her heart pounding in her chest. But she wasn't walking away from something, she was walking into something. The world had always thought she was nothing, but now, Naomi Ellis was a force to be reckoned with. Her dignity was intact. Her future? Endless. She didn't need the power Jin-Ho had. She didn't need to be at the top of the pyramid. She had taken control of her own destiny. But more than that, Naomi had just taught the world a lesson. Underestimating the quiet ones? That's always a mistake. So, what do you think? Naomi's journey from invisible janitor to powerful whistleblower is complete. Did she deserve this win? What do you think the future holds for Naomi now? Drop your thoughts below.